All right, we're live.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Rhonda Devine, and I'm with the Office of Finance and Operations, Division of District Support, Branch Manager for the Student Tracking and Data Branch. Joining me today, I have the Director of Division of Innovation, David Cook, our Associate Director, Jesse Carlton, our Executive Advisor, Matt Ross, along with our members from our branch, Angie McDonald, Laura Lohman, and Josh Whitlow. Today's meeting will be recorded, and we will have the questions and answers document on our webpage on the KDE website under Student Enrollment tab, COVID-19. Next slide, please. In today's discussion, we will cover the following topics: blended learning schedules in Infinite Campus, define and discuss the difference between A1 schools with blended schedules and a true A5 virtual school, participation, performance-based setup. I have a funding reminder. I wanted to talk about the changes with home hospital and then open up for questions. Okay, next slide, please. We need to define blended learning schedules. Blended learning is a combination of learning within a course taught by a teacher from the school district. You can have some students half in seat time and half in virtual. You could have a performance-based course set up with kids that come for seat time some days, and then you have other kids that are 100% seat time and other students that are 100% virtual taking the same course. This is all blended learning with classroom teachers from the school district teaching the course. This should be an A1 school. If you have a student taking a regular class with a school teacher, but they are working from home, then this is still considered blended learning. NTI days would count, and students could change and come back to seat time throughout the year if they wanted. You could have a student taking 100% virtual classes with a regular classroom teacher, and this is still blended learning. If you have a handful of kids from different schools from your district wanting to have a virtual schedule and one classroom teacher working virtually with a handful of kids from different locations within your district, this would still be blended learning. A5 schools are alternative schools that are virtual schools, and they fall within this definition. Kentucky has 3 online and virtual course providers: Bavel, Corbin School of Innovation, Jefferson County eSchool. If your district thinks they want to start an A5 school, reach out to the School Digital Readiness Division of KDE and ask to speak with our digital learning coaches, Marty Parks or Ben Maynard, who will talk with you directly and help you. And I'll email their contact information after this meeting. So I think there needs to be some clarity. People are thinking if they have kids in 100% virtual classes, then that they need to do something different, and they don't. It's still considered blended learning. Next slide, please. Blended learning allows districts to create and assign learning groups to help manage classes and participation in an adaptable setting. So you can group your students that are in class and group students at home taking the same course. I believe there's a checkbox that you would check so that you would have, it's the same course. Group A might be in seat, and then Group B might be working from home. You check the box, it's the same course, but IC then will show where the student is located. They must have a full schedule. The rotations have to remain the same, and they stay within that same grouping. Innovative schedules will work since we are untying funding and attendance. Students will earn participation points that can be tracked and can be used for truancy. If they are participating each day, they get participation. If they only do part of their work, they only get participation for the days that they've worked or completed their work. Again, they could participate and fail a class or not participate fully and pass. Grades and participation are not tied. It's just like now you could have a kid that attends every day and fails a class because they don't really know what's happening, or another student that misses many days and kind of pays attention and he aces the exam. So it's really the same concept. Next slide, please. Participation and blended schedules. So period schedules and blended schedules, you can have rotating schedules that rotate the same every day, but you cannot have rotating all week and then take off half a day on Friday. If you do that, you will only get instructional time for the half day on Friday and not a full day of instruction. It would be just like any other year, early release and no instructional credit for the remainder of that day. The day rotation is all that blended learning can do. It's got to be one full day. So we are looking for those that want to do an AM/PM rotation. It has to be where they have the same rotation all day. So they'll be in seat time all day or virtual all day. So we're looking at ways to maybe do a half day seat time, half afternoon virtual, but at this time, it doesn't look like it's going to work properly. And we're going to be looking more into detail to see if we can figure out how to make a change. But the rotation has to be the same for the entire day. So you can move kids in and out of virtual instruction, but you cannot change the rotation in one day different from the rest. And once again, that rotation's got to be, it's a day-to-day rotation. Next slide, please. So you can set up your performance-based courses for a full Carnegie unit of time as you have in the past, but make sure you are following your board policy when setting these up. Dual credit and virtual performance-based courses will be the same setup as last year, and I have a link to the guidance book that could help you with that. In slide 7, it's just, I'm sorry, the next slide there. Yes, it just shows you that typical outside of the day setup for your performance-based course setup or virtual. The next slide, please. Okay, and just a funding reminder, attendance audits will be put on hold this year. So if you were scheduled for an attendance audit, you'll have one the following year. So we're basically just putting them on hold. You're still going to get your attendance audit, but it'll be next year if you were scheduled this year. So we're keeping the same rotation. We're just kind of putting it on hold. Transportation will be based on last year's calculation because it's part of that SEEK calculation. It's all part of SAR, which goes into SEEK. One thing that you need to remember, I've had a few questions. You should still have a T code listed for each student in IC. So even though the funding is not going to change, you still want to make sure you have that T code. And I don't think you're going to have to then again in December make sure they're all accurate, just as long as you've got that T code per child. And again, unfortunately, growth factor and January growth factor are suspended for this school year. Next slide, please. House Bill 458 came into effect yesterday. This repeals KRS 157.270 and replaces it with KRS 158.033. And we're currently updating our website to reflect that because we still have the old information up there, but we'll get that changed hopefully tomorrow. And you can move to the next slide. There is a clarification for general education students and special education students. but it still requires the 2 instructional sessions per week, or per 5 days, I should say, with a minimum of 1 hour of instruction per session by a certified teacher. The difference now is it can be in person, electronically, or through other means. And then special education students must follow their ARC committee recommendations. So that was really the big change for that. Next slide, please. Now, the 159.030 amends exemption for compulsory education, and here's the big change. The signed statement for mental health can be signed by a licensed physician, advanced practice nurse, physician's assistant, psychologist, psychiatrist responsible for diagnosing and treating the child, stating that the child's diagnosed condition requires home hospital instruction. I sent out an information document that kind of breaks everything down and looks at the changes. So if you didn't receive that from me, let me know and I will resend it, and I will get that put up on our website as well. Okay, and that's really the bulk of what I wanted to talk about. The next slide is just questions and comments. I've had a few questions already that I can just mention. One question was, they've got students that are kind of coming in from the bus at different times, and they can't just go to their classrooms because the teachers aren't there yet. The contracted teacher doesn't start until later than the kids get off the bus. So the question was, well, can we just put all the kids in the gym? And after speaking with Angie, it's up to 50 students can be in one area. You still have to practice social distancing with masks unless you have a doctor's written note why you have some type of reason that you can't wear a mask, or it's part of your IEP that you can't. And that would be in the IEP and the ARC committee recommendation. So it's up to 50 students in one area. Another question we had was about NTI, and the question was, do we have unlimited NTI this year? The answer to that is yes, but we're not giving 7 hours per NTI day as we did last year, not at this time. Last year there was an executive order giving districts the option to check a box to get the 7 hours of NTI, even if their schedule was less than 7 hours. We're not doing that again this year at this time. Now that could change. And so remember, it's last year's ADA for the NTI day for the amount of time in the schedule. And then that'll be put in for that day. And I think that was all the questions that I knew of. Oh, there was a question about the pupil attendance manual. We are currently, we have it updated. We just now have to get it approved. So we'll have that out, and I'll send that out to everyone as soon as we get that done. And the other question, I think I've already answered it, about the where do things stand with mask waivers. You have to have a doctor's statement or determined by the ARC committee that you can't wear a mask. Everyone else has to wear one. And those are the questions that I knew of. Josh, do you have any other ones?
I have some of the Q&A if
okay.
Josh doesn't have it on the Google form. All right, let's see. First one is, sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback here. Will there be full guidance document on this released? And I believe they're talking about the blended schedules.
I'm hoping so. I haven't started one and not sure if we'll get that from more Infinite Campus. Do you have do you know, Jesse?
I know that we're working towards trying to, hammer out all of the scenarios and whatnot. I don't know that there is one exactly yet. I know that there is a guidance document that is in the works to talk about participation and what participation looks like, and what qualifies as participation for these virtual courses.
Okay, and I'll let
Right.
David Cook if you have wanted to add to that.
Yeah, just on Monday, we will be releasing a document that gives you all of the non-IC parts of this conversation. So it, as Jesse said, it talks about what daily participation is, how it's calculated for virtual students as opposed to in-person kids. It also goes into a lot more detail about something that I appreciated Rhonda talking about, which is it goes into greater detail about what constitutes a virtual environment that's not that is what she said at the beginning of this talk, which was there are all these things that as long as you're still in an A1 situation, you are still considered sort of in a traditional format. You're not in that virtual performance-based model that we think about. You are still using the traditional participation daily check-in things. So you're still with your teacher, you're still doing those things, because I think there's been confusion or questions about, do we just put I mean, we'd probably have 90% of our students in virtual performance-based if we moved everybody that was going to do some part of virtual learning into a performance-based model. So we don't want that. We still want to be able to track those kids in a more traditional kind of way. So this document that will come out on Monday actually talks about those other kinds of those different kinds of virtual learning that kids might do, whether it's, like you just mentioned, one day at school, next day out of school, and also kids who are all virtual, but they're being taught by their teacher using the same curriculum and lesson plans as the kids who are face to face.
And I can send that out to everyone also and send it to the DPPs. I think that would be helpful. Thank you very much for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next question. How will the 1062 instructional hours be measured with the varied schedules?
Well, you would have a full schedule for each student, and you'd have to have, you can't have, everyone has to come to school, so you couldn't do a full schedule and then just release early on Friday for half the kids and then count that as an instructional time. It's got to be all kids in school, they all have a full schedule.
And I think you have to remember all of this blended learning that's going on, it's laying on top of your schedules. If you think of it that way, they may be in school or out of school, but they still should have that full schedule in Infinite Campus where we can, see, and the instructional hours will be tied to that.
Exactly. Good. Yes.
Okay. Okay, let's see. T code for students who are on virtual as well. And that's a question. Says they will still be in our rosters and IC ? And I think what they're asking is, do they need a T code for those virtual students as well? And are those virtual students still going to show on their rosters and IC ? I'm going to defer to Josh on this, but I think the answer is probably yes on both of those. And the way I understand it is you want to go ahead and roll forward those T codes to have on those virtual students, because it'll make it easier for you the next year when you roll it forward the next year again, to have something in there. And Josh, can you confirm that they'll still be on those rosters?
Yes, they will still be on those rosters when they do the rollover.
Okay.
And
even though they're virtual?
Even though they're virtual, yes.
Yeah.
Because it goes with their enrollment.
Good.
Yeah. And funding is not tied this year, so it won't hurt anything. But like you said, it'll be a lot easier for the next year.
Right. Okay, when we put our virtual learners in their virtual blended learning group, will their teachers still be marking them as absent or present when taking attendance, or will they just automatically be counted as present?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fine. They're asking if, when you put these virtual learners into these blended learning groups, they're asking if all the virtual learners, if they're going to be automatically marked present and then have to be marked absent, or will, like it happens in school. But what I think we have to remember is that On the virtual learners, and David can correct me if I'm wrong here, on the virtual learners, what we're going to be looking at is the participation and that
Cool.
check of if there's been some participation there. So whether they, the school chooses to still use some attendance on those virtual learners or not, we're going to be looking for that participation checkbox, right, David?
That's exactly right, Jesse. I think we need to remember that, and I know this is a hard shift for everybody to have to make, but you're only thinking about attendance, looking at attendance for the kids who are in person, because you need to still continue to know where they are, obviously. If a kid is in virtual, if they're at their home or whatever, we're checking participation, but they're neither present or absent. They're simply being checked for participation. So there won't be a check of attendance for those kids that will be recorded anywhere.
Okay. All right. We're going back to home hospital now. When the KRS says, quote, other means as established in regulation for home hospital, what are the other means in the regulation? And I think this goes with it. It says, is there going to be a new home hospital application reflecting the new updates?
We are still working on the new form, and we have been in contact, and it's been kind of a busy week, and we are planning on updating that. And other means is just really leaving room for telephone, or it could be a telephone call, it could be electronically. It's just saying that you don't have to be knocking on the front door and coming into the house to have your visit with your teacher.
And all of those things will be outlined in the reg. You kind of get the statute first, and then the reg comes along to kind of explain it a little bit better. And that's where that application is incorporated into that reg. So now that the statute has taken hold, we can, work on that reg to outline some of those things that Rhonda was talking about, that you can use the telephone or some other means, and it'll incorporate that new application. And it's okay, because I've had this question come in, it's okay to continue right now using the application that's out there until we get a new one put out. Okay, still on home hospital here. If a student is placed on home hospital via the ARC, do we need to track the 2 one-hour sessions, or are we just checking the funding box?
Well, this year, funding is not tied, so I would keep track of it, but we're not going to be basing funding on it this year. So I would definitely track and make sure I have everything documented, where I met with the students and the time and the date and that sort of thing.
All right. Would you get the 7 hours of NTI if you use the variable calendar?
NTI is based on the amount of time you have in your day. So if your scheduled day is 7 hours, then that's how much time you'll get for an NTI day. If it's 6.5 hours, then you would only get 6.5. So I think there's some confusion on that, because we had an executive order last year that allowed districts to check the box and get 7 hours, even though their schedule was less than that. But we have not had any executive order or anything stating that we're going to do that this year.
Okay. All right. We have been told previously that we could have class for part of the day and virtual for the other part. You said that the blended learning in IC requires, one or the other, and you can't do both in IC at this time. Is IC working on a way to fix that issue to allow us to do part of the day in person and the other part virtual, in order to count those as instructional minutes?
We have a meeting to try and get that resolved. It's kind of a new, we didn't realize that we couldn't do that until just recently. So we're trying to see if we can figure out how to get that to work with our system.
And I'll jump back in here to say you definitely can do that. That is going to be a 100% viable option for you. We just need to make sure we can figure out on our end how to properly track that and give you some guidance on that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But one thing about that, though, that rotation has to stay the same. So what you do Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, so the rotation has to be the same each day.
Right. Okay. Question that's a bit off subject, but I have several students that have 504 plans that have, I think it says fever-related plans, meaning they have fevers or temps run high.
Mm-hmm.
Who in the state should I direct this to get guidance on related to this screening? And we may have to pull Angie.
We've got Angie available.
I'm here. I'm here. If you have documentation from that child's doctor stating that they have temperature regulation problems, and it's part of the 504 plan or IEP, then they can make accommodations for that student. But they'll need very specific guidelines on what is considered a temperature for that child. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I think it does.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thanks, Angie. Okay, let's see. Could you clarify, please? I thought you said that if a teacher was working with small groups of students from several schools on virtual learning, that would still be considered blended learning. If so, I don't see how the IC blended learning tool would work with groups of students being pulled out of their, quote, regular class for a virtual class and a teacher working with this group of students from several school sites. And I know that was a lot. So I think I can clarify for you, Rhonda, a little bit what they're talking about. I think we need to remember that when we're talking about these students being pulled together, we're not talking about them being pulled together for just one period or another period. We're talking about students who are going to elect to be virtual for the entire day, or that's the method that they've chosen. They don't want to come back to school, and so you're going to be able to provide virtual learning to them. So we're saying that if you have, groups of kids from different elementary schools that have chosen this, within your district, one teacher in your district they're not, kind of held to just, they'll be able to pull in smaller groups from those different schools.
Yeah, and let me just add to that, Jesse. I think
Okay,
you just gave a great example of that, and that is, let's say in a district, and one that comes to mind really quickly, they've decided that they're going to provide a virtual option at the elementary school level, but it's a separate. In other words, it's going to be one school for any kid that wants virtual learning at the elementary level. So there's going to be a few kids from 5 or 6 elementary schools that are going to come together virtually using teachers from those elementary schools, just as Rhonda pointed out a little while ago, but they're going to be separated. They're not going to be the same teacher that they would have if they were in person. That's how I view the idea of small groups of students from different schools. When I think of that, that's what I think of is it's a choice by the district of where they're going to, where the teacher's going to be, or is the teacher going to be. In other words, they've taken, for instance, they've taken one of their 4th grade teachers and made them the virtual teacher. So they're teaching the same curriculum as the other 3 4th grade teachers who are teaching the kids that are in person, but they're getting all of the kids from the district who are virtual that are 4th graders. Mm-hmm. So sort of that model.
All right.
Right.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Okay, we got a question that's going back to this 50 students question, and I do have a kind of a response that came in from Robin, our associate commissioner, that I think maybe will lend to some other guidance that's gone out. So is it okay if I read this question and what she said, Rhonda?
Yes, that'd be excellent. Thank you.
Okay. All right. It's talking about the stated only 50 students can be a single room at once with a mask and social distancing. They're asking if that includes supervision. And does that mean we can't feed more than 50 students in a cafeteria at once during the school day? And so this had come in, and so we kind of asked about the morning routine, and what the response we had got that had been, passed through to, I believe, Department of Public Health and has gone out in some of their guidance. And I believe this was discussed Tuesday on the last superintendent's call, is while our guidance was drafted contemplating that kids would likely go straight to their classrooms, we know that for larger districts, they need this flexibility after temperature taking and symptom checking to go to another location such as the gym or cafeteria. We've said that this is okay if they can provide social distancing, mask if required, and also recommended that they try to sit in cohorts. So like your homeroom or your first period class or some other way to try to keep them and track them that will help with that contact tracing. So, I understand some of these rooms that the larger districts have are very, very large gyms or very, very large cafeterias. So, if you're needing those places for the holding, you need to follow those social distancing guidelines, wear the masks, and try to keep them in those little cohort groups. So if there is an issue with contact tracing, that'll help with that. Angie, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, and I just really, really want to stress the importance of documenting, doing seating charts. This is it's a pain in the neck for everybody, but it's going to save everybody so much time and headache when we do have a reported case, because they're going to need to know seating charts for the bus, seating charts for classrooms, seating charts for special classes, anything like that. So I can't stress enough how important that's going to be for our teachers and staff to keep up with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thanks, Angie. When will the participation tracking be available in Infinite Campus? Josh, do you know the date on that next release?
No, but I can look it up real fast.
Okay. We'll hold on that and we'll circle back to that one because we can because I know it's coming out in 2 parts. I know it's rolling out. First, it'll come out to everybody, and then I think the report and everything will roll out second. So we'll get you that date in just a second. All right, Rhonda, we're back to home hospital here.
Okay.
Is the minimum guideline for special ed students on home hospital also 2 sessions per week, or is that also determined by the ARC?
Minimum guidelines, it's 2 hours every 5 days, 1 hour per session. And that's the definition of home hospital, and that's our minimum requirement. Unless the ARC comes up with it, if the ARC committee has a different recommendation for that student, then that's what, anytime there's special ed, whatever the ARC committee decides is the best for that student, then that's what they would follow, that plan.
All right, good deal. Okay, we're going back to NTI here, David. Will we still need to code a day as NTI on the days tab, or we need to set up blended learning group for this?
Wouldn't that be a NTI day?
Yeah, I think, Rhonda, that's the important thing and I think another thing that this guidance we're giving on Monday will really help clarify this, but you're only using an NTI day when the entire district has decided not to meet in person.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, if you have any portion of your kids meeting in person, then we're using these blended learning groups. So you would never code something, quote, as an NTI day unless it was a true shutdown of the school for that day.
Okay. How does the 152-day equivalent to 170 days work with classified staff? Example, 181-day contract working 7 hours per day.
I sent out a variable calendar guidance document with all of the frequently asked questions. I sent it to all of the DPPs. It's also on our COVID-19 student enrollment website on the KDE site. That question is on that document. If you are a certified employee and your contract runs with the year itself, then it's included in that proportional time. If you are an hourly employee, then it does not. You just get paid per hour. It's not proportional.
Right.
And there is clear documentation, and if that person wants to email me, I will gladly email that variable guidance document. It's very helpful, and a lot of the questions are very detailed, and they give really good, solid examples. So I would love to get that to you if you don't have a copy.
All right, there's some really good specific examples in there, and we have some responses from the retirement systems on how they're going to look at it.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's good. Okay, will the DPP manual have COVID-19 guidance?
We are currently, and we're going to put anything in red that's new for this year. So we're going to have our pupil attendance manual. We've already updated it. And then anything that's new for this year that really pertains to things that are happening this year will be in red. So you'll be able to find it easily, and we'll have all that information in the manual. And we have it almost finished and just going through the different departments to make sure that it's accurate, and we will get that out to you as soon as possible.
All right, Josh, this is a setup question inside of Infinite Campus. So it says, I now see the blue box on the students attendance tab that says update student attendance assignment, blended learning group. But where do I go in IC to put the students in these groups? I don't see blended learning under index.
Let me check on that. I can't remember exactly the terminology they're using.
It may be because it hasn't rolled out yet. They may have just rolled part of it out.
Becky has just sent me a message, and she said the tracking's coming out in 2032, and campus is supposed to release that on 8/3, and then KDE has tentatively scheduled that for 8/5.
Okay.
For August 5th.
All right, so August 5th. So I'm thinking the reason you can see part of it and not find the blended learning groups under index is because I don't think they're going to be there until 8/5. Is that right, Josh? Am I reading that right, what you said?
Yes, I'm thinking so, but I'm going to log into the system and see if I can see it.
Okay, all right, good deal. Okay, for students that are 100% virtual, do they have to be set up in a virtual course outside of the school day marked as performance-based, or can they be scheduled in the courses with other non-virtual students?
Normally there's a placeholder, so it would be the same way you would set it up, unless now Josh, correct me if I'm wrong. So the virtual and performance classes go outside of the day, and then there are placeholders in the day where they're for that class. Is that now still the way we're setting it up?
And I think they're not necessarily talking about what would normally be a virtual performance-based student in every other year. I think they're talking about a student that just this year is choosing not to come back to school because of COVID and wants to do it virtually.
Right, Jesse, I'm thinking, Rhonda, that what they're talking about is if they're what Jesse just described, they're going to do all the same. Their schedule is going to be the schedule of a kid that would be in person, but they're not going to be in person. So they don't need an additional they don't need that performance-based outside of the day added to their schedule since they're virtual. They're going to just be doing their classwork virtually, if that makes any sense. So their schedule is still all the same classes. They're just not in the building.
I think they would be set up as the same as the other students that are in seat, but then there's going to be a place to group them. So then you would group them as virtual. Is that correct, Josh? So they would have the same schedule as the other kids that may be seat time and then but grouped differently?
I'm so sorry. I was looking at something I wasn't really paying attention.
You're right, Rhonda. You're right.
Okay.
I think you're right, Rhonda.
So it's a grouping.
Yes,
so
it's that
same
group. It's that group that lays over top. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Hey, Jesse.
Yeah.
I did find the path. It's under scheduling and then blended learning, and it's already out on the systems.
Okay, so it's not under index. It's under scheduling and blended learning.
It's under index and then scheduling and then blended learning.
Okay. So where it
I've got
lives.
video and I've got the guidance from Infinite Campus on a link on this PowerPoint as well. And because I've been in the campus community and really have gotten a lot of information and rewatched the videos. And so if you go to that campus community, I call it a waffle. You go into the waffle and you can find that blended learning, and it's pretty informative.
All right. Next question. Assuming there will be more students out for 2-week stints for quarantine, do those kids just become virtual learners? And to tag onto that question, it says, what is the purpose of having an online home hospital teacher in the COVID era? So I think first question is, if you go on to quarantine, do those students, will they just become virtual learners?
Well, the district would have to set up their schedule so that they can still be learning, but in virtual mode instead of coming to the school. And
Yes,
home hospital teachers are relevant because they're helping the students, they're visiting with the students, and even though it's not in person, those visits are necessary to help the students become successful. And if they have a special education IEP, then they must have, especially if it's part of that ARC committee and recommended for that student, for them to be making sure that they're servicing the children according to their needs.
Yeah, Rhonda, this question's come up actually twice other times for me today. And I think we probably need some clarification, and either Robin and others can think about this. So if I'm tested positive for COVID, I could be going home for 2 weeks, for 14 days, and not have symptoms. I'm just going home because that's the requirement. In that case, I don't know that you would move that kid into a home and hospital situation automatically. It's just, even though it is a health related, they're being sent home for health related reasons, they can still do their work virtually, just like they just can't be at school.
Right.
As opposed to, I got tested positive for COVID because I have symptoms, and guess what? I'm in the hospital now. And that may be a different scenario than just being tested positive for COVID. So exactly. we may need to clarify that for folks, that what does it mean from a COVID perspective to go into home and hospital?
In home and hospital, you have to have the physician's recommendation and a committee. It's more than just throwing them in home hospital.
Right.
And I think those blended groups this year are going to allow for those quarantine situations where an in-person learner can roll out to virtual learning for those 2 weeks if they are still able, and they're just, because it may not even be them that tested positive. It may be someone in their household that tested positive, but they just have to quarantine now.
That's right.
And then home hospital would be the kid, like David said, they're sick. They're in the hospital. There's a physician's signature on paper. There's a committee. They sign off on everything, and then the student is placed in home hospital.
All right. Now I'm probably going to butcher the name of this platform in this next question, so bear with me. All right. So our virtual students, there it is. Thank you. So our virtual students will be using Edgenuity platform with variations made to that curriculum and checking in with students. Would we still be in A1? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
That's my answer. Back to what Rhonda started the call with today. Those kids, there's a teacher, their teacher. That's just the platform that they've chosen to use for virtual kids. It's a lot easier. It's an LMS type of platform, so they can provide the instruction to all the kids the same way that are virtual. So it's a teacher-led kind of situation. So yeah, they'd still be A1. That'd still be, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're back to instructional minutes here. Can a school make their school day 7 hours and 30 minutes long with a 25-minute lunch, resulting in a 7-hour and 5-minute instructional day to count towards the 1062 hours?
No. By law, 7 hours of instructional time is as long as we allow. So it has to be 7 hours or less. It cannot be more than that, unless there's some type of waiver. But by law, it's 7 hours.
Okay. Let's see. Where exactly are we marking participation for kids that aren't physically present in the building? And Josh, you may be able to speak to I believe this is coming in a release, but have you seen enough to know where that is located? Is it on Gradebook?
It's going to be on under Gradebook, and I think the attendance tab as well. I think it's going to be in 2 spots.
Okay. All right. So if we are on a Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday rotation, we're only concerned with the Monday, Wednesday students on Monday and Wednesday. Are you saying Mondays, for example, are concerned with attendance or participation checked for a Tuesday student? And I think you're going to look at every day.
Yes,
Correct.
if you have a rotation where kids are maybe Monday, Wednesday physically coming to the school, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday working from home, you're still going to be tracking their participation for the 5 days. You might physically see them Monday, Wednesday, so it's easy to check a box for that. But the days that they're virtually working, that you don't physically see them, they're still going to have to produce work. They could have maybe a work packet at the end of the week where they have work that they must finish for the days that they're working virtually. You can track participation by the work that they've completed, or a phone call that you've spoken, or maybe you have a way to email them and then you've had some communication with the student. But if they have a certain amount of work that they need to be finished by the end of the week, if they don't have that, then they're not going to get participation for the days that you don't physically see them. But if all their work is complete, you've spoken with them, or however your district decides that you want to communicate with those students, then you would mark them for participation.
Okay. Can you go into more depth on the difference between an A1 and an A5 school?
Okay. An A5 school is if you have a program that the school literally is purchasing, that it's the program with their own teachers, and I think we've got 3 within the state of Kentucky that's approved: Babel, Jefferson East School, and Corbin
Innovation.
Innovation of
Organization.
yes. That would be an A5 virtual school. It's an alternative school, and you would have to either have it set up already or speak with I don't remember Marty's last name.
Park.
Park to start that as an A5 school. Other than that, if you are using your regular education or just teachers within your school district and they're teaching the class, then that's an A1 blended learning.
Yeah, and I think another distinction, if folks that think about it in a more whole school way. So an A1 school is a school just like a building, and it has its own school number. The kids that are in it are being assessed if the state assessment occurs in the spring under that school. It has a site-based council. An A5 program is something that is separate, that the district basically is operating like a virtual school, like in Corbin or in Babel. That is not, it usually means that it's a district-wide kind of program, and the biggest A5 example we have are alternative programs, i.e. programs mostly for behavioral and other kinds of issues, where you pulled a kid out because they need to be in a different environment, and so that alternative program is there. That's another example of an A5 program. But an A1 school is like Hearn Elementary School or whatever in County X. It's a school that has a council, that has a principal, in the sense of like we would normally think of it.
Thank you.
Okay, back to home hospital again. Can you provide clarification on the home hospital authorization regarding the difference in required signatures that require only a physician's signature and when one is needed from someone with mental health credentials?
If
I
it's a-
think
if
I
it's
think
a
they're
men-
asking why, why would be the difference? When would you need one with the mental health credentials?
Well, for the mental health credentials, it was for mental health issues, it had to be psychologist or psychologist sign the paperwork. And in a lot of areas throughout Kentucky, there may only be one or two. So there's a waiting list of, 2 months before you can get a child to see a psychologist or psychiatrist. And then if they have a mental issue that needs immediate care, then it was a problem. So now you have other people that are working with the child, part of that diagnosis, that can sign the paperwork, and they don't have to wait 2 months to be seen. And on the PowerPoint, it gives the list, and it's also in the law, and it gives you the list of the different type of people that can sign for mental health issues.
Okay, somebody was asking where the PowerPoint's going to be posted, and Laura has put in the link to where they'll be posted after this in the chat window and the question and answer, so thank you, Laura. Let's see. Okay, for the blended model, can participation be recorded weekly, or should it be on the same day of services? For instance, a student may need extended time beyond a single day.
That's really a local issue, how they want to do it. Do they want to do it daily? Do they want to do it weekly, or give 2 weeks? It really depends on how they want to set it up. We would suggest daily, but really if you're doing a packet that lasts for a week, you're going to need 5 days so that you can get the packet from the student and grade the work and give them their participation. So it really just depends.
Yeah. It depends, Rhonda, and that's why we specifically in the emergency reg left that open for people. So we didn't, even though we have a requirement for daily participation to be entered, you don't have to enter it every day. We gave them that sort of out to say, if you have, just as an example, what you just said, a weekly packet, you can record that in IC at the end of the week. But you have to record something for every day. It's just, you don't have to, teacher doesn't have to sit there every day and go, for every kid every day. So.
Okay, all right. I have somebody reminding me that we usually do this in a little bit of different order, and they're asking about their questions that they had, I believe, submitted in on the Google Sheet. So, Josh, do we have some questions on the Google Sheet today that we could circle back to?
And while you're doing that, Jesse, I see one that I wanted to just quickly answer that was a little further down.
Go for it.
And this is also going to be in our guidance Monday because it is a difference for 2021. And that is, normally you would not predetermine NTI days in your school calendar because it's obvious. With traditional NTI, you don't know when it's going to snow, so you can't sort of put that in. But in this particular year, we are allowing you to, as you show your days on your calendar, and you are one of those hybrid model approaches or every other day approaches. If Fridays are an NTI day for you, you can show those as NTI days on the front end. So you can actually label a day in the calendar as an NTI day.
Thank you, David.
And also I wanted to remind everyone, if you haven't had turned in your amended or your original calendars, please get those in. I know we gave you until the end of the month, but the sooner the better on those.
Okay, we have some on the Google form. It says, one of them is, are we required to use a certified interpreter to help with our EL population with OLR, or may we utilize teachers or other staff that speak the foreign language to assist families?
I would say if you have a teacher that could decipher and work with the student, in the family, I don't see why you couldn't utilize them, but I'd have to get a formal answer for you.
Okay. How is NTI recorded this year? Are weekly participation numbers or work examples still needed?
Well, an NTI is going to be recorded as a day, like an NTI day it has to be
Right,
every
but
school.
I think what they're asking, Rhonda, is in the past, for instance, this spring, we had folks report their participation through SharePoint because we weren't using IC yet, and we had them required to submit lesson plan examples of what they were doing with NTI. That second part is no longer required. What we're doing in IC is your NTI. So on an NTI day, you're still going to record participation for those kids, just like you would if they were in person, but everybody's not in person, so it's a participation thing. So that's the only requirement that folks will have even on an NTI day. They won't have additional stuff they have to submit to us. It's just we're going to pull that participation information out of IC on those dates that were set up in the emergency reg in October, January, and July.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If a district is 100% remote learning, some virtual, maybe others using work packets, how is that recorded? Can we use one blended learning group called remote learning?
I don't see why you couldn't, Josh. Is that something that you would know?
That's probably one of those that we're going to discuss in that next meeting that we have with Infinite Campus on that.
Okay.
Okay, you said mid-year T-code checks are not necessary. How accurate do beginning of year T-codes need to be? Should we leave existing T-codes alone for this year?
I would just roll them from last year into this year.
And I will add to that, if the student or parent provides that information, I would go ahead and enter that in. But if they do not provide it, I would just, let it roll on as it has been as last year. That's all I have on my side, Jesse.
Okay. All right. We'll roll back over here to the Q&A. We're coming up on 3 o'clock. Is everybody okay to take on a few more questions to try and get through some of these?
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. Okay. How can groups be used if a student chooses the in-seat option but maybe move to a virtual enrollment for 2 weeks with a different teacher during a quarantine period for only that student? And I think this is the district thinking that when they moved out to a virtual, they would move out to a different teacher. But I believe, David, aren't we kind of envisioning that being, a teacher having possibly in-person students and virtual students?
Yeah, I think you need the way you need to think about what Marty Park would call a full-time virtual kid is that's a kid who's making the decision probably at the beginning of the year that they're going to start in virtual, and they may be that kid that moves over to a different teacher. But I think if it's a situation where they start out in person and they go to a quarantine, that you're probably looking at that same teacher that the kid had being their teacher while they're out. They're just doing things virtually. So it has it's sort of an element of a little bit of, it's like a hodgepodge. So it's a little home and hospital, it's a little, but it's in other words, that kid is really just being kept supported by that teacher. They just don't happen to be in the classroom.
Right. And as a follow-up to the second question kind of goes into this, and you can then count them with participation for those days that they are at home virtually in quarantine, right?
Correct.
Yes.
And the home hospital question has come up again about a doctor's statement. So, but we would only move them to home hospital if there was a doctor's statement saying that they were sick enough that they needed to be in home hospital.
Exactly.
Right. That has changed.
Yeah, a COVID quarantine doesn't make you home and hospital eligible. It just means you're not at school.
Okay. All right. So for the one teacher teaching all the virtual kids from multiple schools, Are those students enrolled in a virtual academy school in IC, or do they remain enrolled in their school as normal?
That's the A1, A5 question that Rhonda was talking about.
Right.
They could be still in their A1 school, which is their school of record, if you will, or they could be, the district could create the Franklin County Virtual Academy. That's a separate A5 program, and those kids could be moved over into that program.
Right.
But they're still, you would still consider those kids when you're thinking about participation as being part of, they're in a school and they're in a class. It's not like a more traditional performance-based model. They're still, if that makes sense.
Well, then that would still be an A1, but they would just have another additional school. I think that's something we might want to.
Yeah, I think we probably do need to have and I think we're going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow, Jesse, on a call, but I think that's the one place where we still need to figure that out, because it could be that virtual academy, even though it's an A5, is still going to use the same curriculum that the regular school is. They just have decided to, for lack of a better word, all the kids are in one location who are virtual. And that's just a separate location from, but they're still going to be doing, even though it might be a different teacher, they're still going to be doing the same things that the kids did in the regular A1 classroom. And that's different than if you completely, like this person said, there's situations, and we think about our credit recovery programs. That's an A5 type of situation that is performance-based, completely performance-based, as opposed to a situation where they may be using the school's developed curriculum, but at a different location. So we need to have that conversation about that A5 versus A1.
All right. Next question. With no growth factor, can districts expect to receive a slightly higher ADM for student funding than we would have if there was an ADA funding model?
And for the funding, we are whatever your district used for either 18-19 or 19-20, that is the same funding that we're going to be using for our C calculation for next year.
Right. So there won't be any changes to that for ADM or ADA, either one.
Change, right.
All right. My counselors have built schedules for all students. Now they are moving students into cohorts so that they can travel together all day. Will they need to reschedule all students to reflect schedule changes?
The answer to that is yes.
Okay.
And so I would reach out to Infinite Campus for support so they can help you change your schedules around or make sure your system is backed up when they start changing your schedule around.
Okay. All right. If the entire district has decided not to return in person, some students may be working virtually, others via physical packets. Do we schedule as usual and create a blended group called remote learning and place all students in all schools in that group to track participation?
Josh, you'll probably have to help me with this one, but I would think that you would just schedule all the kids within their own schools and have it virtually, have them in a virtual grouping.
Yes, that's correct, because they're still going to have a full schedule for the participation to track.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they're going to need to be in that blended learning group.
Correct.
So that they can track that participation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do groups have to be 50 or smaller during the school day? Does that mean less than 50 students can be in the hallway at once? And can we only feed 50 students at a time in the cafeteria? And I think that goes back to that social distancing again.
Yes. And Angie, I'm going to let you help with that, because we had talked earlier about the 50 or less students in an area. So I'm not sure if is that accurate?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. It's talking about the groups of 50 or smaller during the school day. And does that mean less than 50 students can be in the hallway at once? And can we only feed 50 students at a time in the cafeteria?
The 50 number is coming from the governor's order of groups, that there can't be any group gatherings of more than 50 people. So that's where that number is coming from. I would think you would try to, yeah, I'm sorry.
But that's what I was going to say, but what we've put out in some DPH guidance for school openings is that
Right.
We're looking at the social distancing and keeping the
Right.
masks on if you
Right.
can't get, within the 6 feet
Yes.
and,
Yes.
and maintaining your groups. And, we understand there may be some situations where, you may need to, put some of these people, together in larger
You just
groups.
do the best you can, and
Mhm.
you spread them out as best as possible, and things that you can stagger, to maybe limit the amount of kids at halls at one time. Maybe you do one bill for one grade and one bill for I don't know, but it's just to be a little more creative and flexible. But it's just like the buses. We know there's going to be more than 50 kids probably on a bus at one time, but
Right.
we've just got to use our other mitigating factors to add those other layers of protection the best we can.
Okay. All right. I'm scrolling through a little bit here. I think we've answered some of these questions. Talking about NTI being tracked via participation in the grade book rather than reporting it in on SharePoint the way it has been done in the past. Let's see. I'm sorry. Okay, if we're using the blended learning groups and we get shut down for 2 weeks, do we have the option of moving everyone into a group and automatically marking it NTI? Same thing to do a virtual start. Do we automatically mark it NTI if everyone is virtual versus changing them to a virtual group?
So if the school it would be an NTI day if the entire, district was
Correct.
out.
I don't think you, and that's the question for you, David. If they do mark the entire school as an NTI day, are they still going to have access to mark those for participation, or do they need to put them all into that virtual blended learning group first? And that may be something we may need to just follow back up on.
Yeah, that's probably, I need to think about that a second, because we do want them obviously to be eligible to be, to check that daily participation. So
Right.
I think, because I don't think we would move them into a different group. Let's just pretend that COVID didn't happen and it's a regular school year and the district is NTI and they had a snow day. We wouldn't move those kids in and out just because they had a snow day. Their schedules are there. They have, but I'm not sure what the trigger would be, but because let's look at it this way. Jefferson is going to announce later today probably that they're starting with 6 weeks of NTI. So the whole district is going to be NTI, but we need to be able to track participation for every one of those kids. So that's we probably do need to think about that one a little bit.
Okay. All right, we've got down to about 2 questions left because I think we'd answered the majority of those. So we are offering either virtual or in-person classes. If they are absent, do we mark the child as absent? If they're in class, they're expected to be in a seat. That's correct, right, Rhonda? We're doing
Yes.
For in-person classes, we're doing all just the same. Take attendance just like you would.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right. If our district is planning to offer 2 options, one is totally virtual and the other one is in attendance, but with a virtual day on Monday, that would mean all students will be virtual on Monday. So every Monday, do we keep the 2 groups or do we mark every Monday as an NTI?
Every Monday would be an NTI day. If everybody is out of school, that's NTI.
Okay. All right, well, we've ran over just a little bit, and I scrolled down through here to try and get some of the questions that we hadn't hit on just a little bit. So if I've missed one of your questions, they're asking here if we're going to release a data standard or best practice for these blended learning groups. And I think that's part of what David alluded to on Monday. There's going to be some guidance coming out on the way to track that participation and what they are. But other than that, we always do put out the Q&A afterwards. So if I've missed your question, we'll try and get it there. So Rhonda, back to you.
Oh, that's, I think we've had a really productive session today, and I really appreciate everyone that joined in and asked very good questions and is working with us, and we'll have everything answered as soon as we can. I think Monday's document is going to be very helpful. So feel free to reach out to me or anyone in our staff, and you can see our email and phone numbers that are listed. If you're in a region, you can reach out to either Ruth or Scott or Sheila, depending on your location. And of course, you can always reach out to me. And we hope that you found today helpful, and we appreciate your time.
Rhonda, real quick, I just wanted to add to that, that we hope this will be helpful as well for questions that are a little bit more related to NTI and participation. My staff has now been aligned to Scott, Ruth, and Sheila. So we are in, even though we're not field-based, my staff will have a region of the state, so that if you're the DPP and you have a question that may be a little bit more related to NTI than attendance or something like that, those folks will have somebody that they can contact with a specific NTI question, and it will be the same set of districts. It's exactly the same regions. So Scott will have somebody from my office, and Ruth will have somebody from my office, so forth. I just wanted that. We're sending out that information probably tomorrow about who's has that, but just another layer of support in all of this.
And as soon as we get all of that really written down, I can send that information out to all the DPPs so that they have clear guidance on who their point of contact is. So we'll make sure we get that out to you as well. And we'll hopefully meet again in 2 weeks. We may meet sooner depending on if we get some of these things resolved and we feel like we need to get together next Thursday. I will send out a meeting request to everyone. So we'll either meet again in a week or we'll meet in 2 weeks. I think after our meeting with David Cook and his group and the guidance on Monday, we'll be able to determine when would be a good time to meet. So thank you again for your afternoon, and we appreciate it.